The ascendant halls of Velithar were carved from moonstone and irradiated crystal, orbiting the golden gas giant of Trellis V within them. The nobles of the Solari Dominion reclined on vapor couches, their robes stitched with quantum silks that shimmered like nebulae. They dined on liquefied stardust and drank from cups cut from comet cores. These halls were the epicenter of decorum, tradition, and centuries-old disdain for the primitive. And nowhere was that disdain more pointed than when directed at humanity. They spoke of Earth as a world of rot and desperation, its people mudlings clinging to an overused crust, barely qualifying for spaceflight. Among the Dominion's nobility, the idea that humans might one day be a galactic power was so absurd it had become a running joke, passed from house to house, generation to generation. On this particular day, House Moretha hosted the Laughing Conclave, an annual festival of satire where nobles from across the sector brought tales of galactic absurdity to amuse their peers. And the humans, ever clumsy, ever eager, were a favorite target. A recycled freighter from the Sol Drift collapsed in on itself when attempting orbit, chuckled Lord Velier, a serpentine noble with a crest of bioluminescent feathers. They tried to use stripped ice haulers as bulkheads, ice haulers. The room howled with laughter. One noble choked on his plasma wine, slapping the table as another mimicked humans with exaggerated grunts and patchwork uniforms. They barter in obsolete metals and trade synthetic nutrients like delicacies, sneered Lady Kefra, her voice like wind across razors. They're scavengers, not a species. Let them cobble their trash into sculptures, the Dominion will sculpt galaxies. And yet across the void in the shadow of Saturn's rings, humans were not laughing. In the Uit Yards, a clandestine operation was underway. Commander Vesta Marin, formerly of the Eurasian Orbital Guard, strode through the interior of Bastion, a decommissioned deep space ice hauler now retrofitted with ablative armor and retro-engineered gravitic lances. Her boots clanged against the cold decking. Every panel, every bolt had a story, scavenged from orbital debris fields, mined from the shattered remains of interplanetary warships, or traded with outlawed Terran enclaves who lived in forgotten domes along the Kuiper Belt. The fleet was coming together. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't symmetrical, but it worked. Power grid stable, barked engineer Dorokames, his hands blackened with drive coolant. We're drawing at 78% peak, good enough for atmospheric breaching. Not good enough, Vesta snapped. We need 85 minimum if we're going to run a direct pincer on the Hept array. Those Dominion monitors will intercept anything less. Kames exhaled, adjusted a jury-rigged capacitor cluster, and gave her a nod. We'll get there, or the ship dies, no middle path. Vesta moved on, passing by children soldering drone swarms under the guidance of a retired AI technician from Lagos. In another chamber, a former Martian geologist was explaining how asteroid cores could be converted into high-velocity kinetic munitions. This was humanity's answer to nobility and mockery, work, innovation, desperation turned into drive. And yet none of this had been sanctioned. Earth's official representatives still groveled before the Dominion, promising fealty and economic compliance. The United Terran Council had no hand in this fleet. They had called it a criminal rebellion. They had issued warrants for Vesta's arrest. She didn't care. We'll be ready, she told Kames again, not as reassurance but as invocation. The nobles think we're a bad joke, let them laugh. Their empires are polished shells, ours is still growing. In the void near Cygnes Prime, Baron Talon Joth of House Moretha concluded his performance at the Laughing Conclave by projecting a hologram of a Terran assembly line welding old ice hauler girders together under the freezing light of Europa. Behold, he declared, gesturing with theatrical flair, the proud warfleet of humanity. Laughter exploded across the room. The nobles clapped their luminescent hands and rolled along gravity-defying rails in merriment. But in a listening post embedded in an asteroid on the edge of neutral space, that very same hologram had been intercepted and replayed. Captain Le Ruin of the Free Belt Armada watched it in silence, arms crossed. They think we're building toys, she said. No, answered her second-in-command, Sergeant Adami, they think we're not building at all. Then it's time they learned, Lay replied. Signal Bastion, Operation Glassline is approved. We begin Phase 1 within 72 hours. Far from Earth, beyond the Dominion's eyes, human ships were gathering in the dark. They were patchwork beasts, burn-scarred and shield-layered with discarded tech and scavenged matter. But inside them burned something far older than Solari nobility, older than the Dominion's archives and their gilded codes of conduct. Inside them burned defiance. Inside them burned humanity. The first Dominion ship to vanish was a patrol cutter from House Velarai, charting the Periphas drift on its routine border sweep. It had transmitted a brief, distorted signal, static layered with a fragmented image of an irregular silhouette before its datalink went dead. The Dominion authorities dismissed it as a drive malfunction. The Velarai barons scoffed at the suggestion of foul play. 6 hours later, a diplomatic corvette vanished en route to the trade moon of Navari IV. By the end of the next cycle, 6 ships were missing, all Dominion, all in the outer territories. Admiral Sail Raven of the Solari Outer Defense Sphere stood before a panel of nobles convened aboard the Harmonious Descent, a crescent-shaped capital vessel ringed in solar glass. Around him floated hollows of redacted star maps, blinking with missing asset markers. "There is a pattern," Raven said coolly. "Interceptions along trade drift corridors, clean strikes, no debris, no survivors." "And you attribute this to humans," sneered High Matron Orvia, her many-eyed face twisted with disdain. "I attribute it to someone willing to act without regard for custom or warning. That limits the possibilities." The chamber erupted in quiet contempt. To the Solari elite, piracy was an annoyance, not a threat. And Earth's inhabitants, those who hadn't sold themselves to Dominion regulation, were barely a footnote in the margins of their threat matrices. But House Maretha was beginning to whisper. Far across the void in the skeletal confines of the converted Hauler Glory's ash, Lieutenant Varku Hen drifted beside a torpedo rack, his breath fogging the thin atmosphere. Each torpedo bore hand-scrawled marks, personal crests, names of lost cities: Dhaka, Rio, Kinshasa, Melbourne. Varku had never been to Earth. Born on a rogue ice colony orbiting a brown dwarf, he had never felt gravity until the age of 17. But when the call went out from Bastion, he'd answered it, not for revenge, for future. He clipped into his harness and braced as the torpedo bay sealed. "Target lock confirmed," came the voice of Command Vector 6, a former agricultural AI now reprogrammed for combat calculus. "Primary strike on Dominion refueling depot Alero's reach authorized." Varku closed his eyes. Fire. The torpedoes launched like silent prayers into the dark. At Alero's reach, just outside the orbital rim of the Dominion-held planet Halseth, the strike came without ceremony. No formal declaration. No challenge. The kinetic projectiles, armored in compacted asteroid alloy, impacted the station's core reactor before alarms even reached the outer barracks. The explosion created a silent supernova against the planet's curve, visible for hours across the sector. The Solari Dominion did not laugh. But their first response was pride, not fear. Within 2 cycles, House Maretha deployed the Radiant Penance, a dreadnought of staggering proportions built in the twin forges of Cygnes Prime. Alongside it moved 6 hunter lances and 3 auxiliary hive ships. Their goal was simple: sweep the drift zones, isolate the insurgents, and destroy whatever fragmented fleet the humans had cobbled together. Baron Talon Joth himself commanded the operation, still amused. "Let them play admiral with their garbage," he told his lieutenants. "Let them feel the fury of true lineage." On the bridge of the Radiant Penance, he donned his battle-crested robes, unaware that his deployment had been anticipated. In the Uit yards, Vesta Marin stood before a constellation map riddled with burn path calculations and drift decay models. Around her, commanders from every human arc, the Belt Remnants, the Europanclade, the Pacific Exodus, even remnants of the Tethys Reclaimers, listened in grim silence. "They're deploying the Penance," she said, "and they're doing it with nobles on board. This isn't just retaliation, it's spectacle." "They think we'll scatter," said Le Ruin, nodding toward the map, "like we always did." "They don't understand," replied Vesta. "We've never had a fleet before, but now we have something else, something new." She turned to the engineer corps, who had been modifying old cargo drones into microlattice mirror swarms. It was unorthodox, absurd by Dominion standards. But it was fast, and it was unpredictable. "Commence the ghost net," she ordered. In the darkness of Sector L944, a corridor of forgotten space once used by long-defunct mining cartels, the Dominion fleet moved in formation. The Radiant Penance's shields shimmered and its grav cannons pulsed in readiness. It expected battle. It expected brute tactics and desperation charges. What it received was nothing. No enemies, no signals, just stars. Then the sensors failed. Thousands of reflective shards detached from converted cargo drones and coated with fine layers of polarized ferroglass flooded the area, scrambling LiDAR and heat mapping. The fleet's internal coordination collapsed, targeting arrays fractured. Dominion captains, trained for elegance and doctrine, lost cohesion. And then came the humans. From every angle, ships emerged, debris-laced, irregularly armored, bristling with retrofitted mass drivers and hull-borne railguns. They didn't maneuver like proper ships. They broke formation. They drifted and slingshotted and counterburned using lunar thrusters from 3 wars ago. And they attacked with precision. The first to fall was Thrina's Fall, a hunterlance torn open by internal detonations after a human boarding pod, an old Martian ice transport container, punched through its midsection. Then a flanking hive ship lost engine power, its command cortex hijacked by a malware packet derived from Terran marketing AIs. Baron Talon Joth watched the chaos from his gilded command chair, face frozen in disbelief. "Where is their formation?" he demanded. "Where is their center of gravity?" "There is none," replied his sensor chief, panic creeping into his voice. "They're everywhere." And that was the truth of it. Humanity hadn't built a fleet in the Dominion's image. They had built a swarm. Not bound by protocol, not tied to aristocratic doctrine. They had taken the ice haulers, the miners, the trash barges, and the forgotten hulls of corporate age long past, and turned them into war. As the radiant pennants turned to flee, 2 human vessels, Hammerfall and Kalpana's Wake, intersected its trajectory, bracing for impact, shielding smaller craft that harpooned its belly. They weren't there to win with one blow, they were there to tear down piece by piece. And as the Dominion forces scattered, the humans didn't pursue, they held position. Floating in victory in silence over the wreckage of a noble fleet. Not a word was broadcast, but the message was clear. More than poverty had been laughed at, and more than dignity had been reclaimed. The wreckage of the radiant pennants drifted for 8 days. Its scorched hull spun slowly in the void, split open along its ventral axis, its noble banners charred and tangled around the ruptured keel. The Dominion left it there unclaimed. No retrieval teams were dispatched. No honor rites were performed. To recover it would be to acknowledge defeat. To examine it would mean facing what had happened. And so in quiet shame they let it rot. But across the rimward sectors, eyes turned. The Karith coalition, long silent, sent a diplomatic probe into the vicinity of Sol. The Ezerethi Triarchy, staunch allies of the Dominion, suddenly suspended their tariff enforcement against human merchants near the Cerulean Belt. And on the glimmering council's encrypted channels, the phrase Uit-born tactics began circulating among tacticians who had once dismissed Earth entirely. On Earth itself, things were changing. The United Terran Council had convened an emergency session in Geneva Spire under pressure from both terrified citizens and ambitious technocrats. Officially, they still denounced the fleet, but privately more than one councillor had requested contact with Vesta Marin's Shadow Command. It was no longer a matter of rebellion. It was now an opportunity. In the subterranean war chambers beneath New Oslo, Vice Admiral Marin stood before the full assembly of the Free Belt Armada for the first time. No longer hiding. No longer rogue. "We are no longer a rumor," she said. "We are no longer a whisper in the dark. We faced a Selari noble fleet at full strength, and we broke them." The room erupted, not in cheers but in solemn acknowledgement. Her voice hardened. "But they will return in numbers we cannot yet match. They will adapt, they are ancient, but we have learned something they will never understand. Nobility is brittle, doctrine is slow, we are neither." She gestured to the holomap above her, a newly marked corridor threading through abandoned Dominion infrastructure routes. It had once been called the Ghost's Spine, a forgotten trade artery shut down after the resource wars, but now it pulsed with new activity. "We take the spine, we seed it, every dead system, every forgotten relay. We make them ours, not for conquest but for permanence, for survival." Across the expanse of Terran-aligned space, construction surged. On Ceres, industrial forges once used for low-grade manufacturing were converted to produce angular hull plating and modular weapon nodes. In orbit around Titan, long-forgotten orbital rings were reactivated, serving as relay points for encrypted communications and resupply stations. Even Luna, where the Council's neutrality was still officially observed, saw secret deliveries arrive under cover of diplomatic transport. Humanity had not won a war, but it had won its first engagement. And that changed everything. The Dominion's response came with operatic fury. House Moretha was publicly humiliated. Baron Talon Joth was stripped of his command titles and exiled to the cold sphere monastery of Dravalis, where dishonored nobles studied failure under the weight of silence. But the real answer came from higher. The High Bastion Assembly, the oldest and most conservative tier of the Dominion's structure, issued Directive Tempest, a formal wartime order not used in centuries. It granted full tactical liberty to Executor Vale Tharun, a warlord from House Orinox with no tolerance for pageantry. He did not bring banners. He did not attend the conclaves. He brought destroyers, 82 in total. His flagship Vanguard of Silence was built in the forges of Noxaxis Prime and carried weapons forbidden to lesser houses, entropy lances, phase shift blades, temporal saturation fields. He did not speak when he arrived in system. He issued no ultimatum. He simply began dismantling everything. The colonies on Sigma Rho were the first to fall, settlements with no formal allegiance to the fleet, yet harboring sympathizers. They were glassed from orbit in under 3 hours. The orbital shipyards above Varan's gate were annihilated without warning. The wreckage fell onto the world's upper atmosphere, causing storms that raged for planetary rotations. In a dark conference aboard the Kalpana's wake, Vesta Marin listened to the casualty reports without blinking. "What's his pattern?" she asked. "There isn't one," Lei Ruan replied grimly. "He's not targeting military infrastructure exclusively. He's burning anything human-aligned, scorched sky." "They're trying to terrorize us back into silence," said Engineer Kamez. "Push us into hiding, break the unity." "They won't," Vesta answered, already charting new distribution paths on her tablet. "We fragment, we spread, we become ungraspable." She transmitted new orders to every node in the fleet. Decentralize, replicate, evade, strike. And the swarm obeyed. Across the fringe systems, Dominion supply lines began to fray under constant microassault. Human stealth corvettes, engineered from old stealth mining rigs, deployed sensor-blind decoys and launched precision strikes on critical transports. The Dominion's logistical net began to flicker. Executor Tharun responded with brutal clarity. He deployed suppression arcs, wide-field disruption zones using static field generators designed to disable all communication across hundreds of kilometers. He intended to isolate human cells. Instead, he discovered they had evolved beyond reliance on centralized data. Humanity now operated like neural dust, thousands of semi-autonomous units, trained, armed, and briefed to act independently. They didn't fall into disorder. They adapted to it. In a hidden archive chamber beneath Europa's ice crust, an ancient AI awakened for the first time in 200 years. It had been built during the resource collapse, sealed away when Earth turned inward. Now, repurposed and fed with new data from the swarm, it began calculating fleet harmonics. It called itself Scion, and it had no interest in compromise. Across the growing resistance, Scion's protocols began to replace older human algorithms. Its designs, refracted hull geometries, gravitic flares, microsingularity jump relays were too unstable for Dominion use. But perfect for humans who had nothing to lose. Within 6 months, 27 new ships entered the void. Each one built from materials no Dominion vessel would ever tolerate. Blackened hulls from Venusian atmospheric scoops, gravitic cores made of failed orbital elevators, shield nodes powered by decaying quantum cores from Sol's abandoned solar collectors. They were hideous. And they were deadly. And yet amid these escalating tides of war, something else stirred. A Dominion patrol intercepted a faint transmission on the edge of the Arco's fringe, an old Earth signal, encoded in analog, pulsing in Morse code. It repeated a single phrase. "We will not become your reflection." Executor Tharun heard the message in silence. He stood on the observation deck of Vanguard of Silence, staring into the distant glimmer of the Terran-adjacent sectors. "I was told they were desperate," he said. "I see now they are not desperate, they are free." He turned to his adjutant. "Prepare the Spear of Purity." Across the galaxy, forces stirred. All knew now this was no rebellion. It was the birth of something the Dominion could not afford to name. Not yet, but they all felt it. Something new was rising. And it had teeth. The Spear of Purity was not a ship. It was a doctrine. A full-sector cleansing directive that authorized the Dominion to override all treaties, planetary protections, and noble house charters in pursuit of a contaminated species. No precedent existed for its use in the past 2 millennia. To invoke it was to declare not just war, but unbeing. In the old ways, such decrees had ended civilizations. Executor Vale Tharun deployed it with surgical speed. Automated sterilization fleets surged from Dominion core worlds, each equipped with planet Vale arrays capable of converting atmosphere into plasma. Quantum sieves sterilized orbital platforms. Artificial plagues seeded into biospheres ensured nothing human-aligned could survive long-term. One of the first targets was Kepler 62e, a colony barely 20 years old. Mostly settlers, engineers, agrogeneticists, it had no formal affiliation with the fleet, but a single cargo manifest listed spatial hardware, non-standard origin. That was enough. Within 92 minutes, the surface was a sea of glass. But the Dominion was chasing shadows. The swarm had fractured again, not in retreat into convergence, coordinated divergence. Dozens of task groups, cells, fabrication nodes, and stealth command relays melted into asteroid belts, solar sheaths, magnetic null zones. Each node operated under the new lattice directive seeded by Cyan. No central fleet, only vectors. This was not how wars were fought in Dominion records. War was hierarchy, measured in mass and prestige, executed by noble command. But humans no longer fought wars. They fought futures. On the ice-locked exoplanet of Halden's Reach, a tiny outpost hidden beneath permafrost-completed construction of the Black Choir, a non-radiative signal web that could coordinate human swarm vectors across 12 sectors without traceable emissions. It was built using parts from ruined xeno-digging machines and AI memory cores corrupted during the Europa surge. Its first message was relayed directly to Executor Tharun's Vanguard fleet. Not in Celari protocol, but in Terran dialect. Your roots are deep, Dominion. Ours are fast. Within 6 minutes, coordinated strikes severed Dominion sensor nets across the fringe. 8 relay towers collapsed. 5 jump gates were magnetically jammed mid-transit, vaporizing ships as they exited fold. Aboard Vanguard of Silence, Tharun watched the reports unfold in absolute calm. They have learned to blind us, he murmured. They have learned to forget their own origins. No, said Advisor Levesque, a younger noble raised among the military castes. They remember too well. They have made forgetting a weapon. Tharun turned from the datasphere. Then we changed the field. He deployed the Omega Bastion. No one knew the Dominion had built it, a failsafe designed not for war but for stasis. It was not mobile, it did not fire weapons. It changed space. Constructed in the gravitational shell of a collapsed moon, the Omega Bastion could generate a volumetric anomaly, folding space around a central anchor and creating a static zone 10 light-minutes across. Nothing in, nothing out. No signals, no jumps. No escape. Tharun did not send it toward Earth. He aimed it at the Ardent Veil, a known transit corridor for swarm vectors. If he could trap them there, deny them flux, he could starve them, make them claw for breath. But he did not know the veil was already empty. Because Earth had moved. Not the planet. The center of gravity. On a drifting station outside the galactic current, Vesta Marin stood aboard Cradle 9, the new mobile relay command. It had no registry, no signature. Its components came from abandoned Dyson node fragments and the stripped magnetic hull of a Jovian weather array. It was a ghost, never in one place long enough to be caught. She leaned over a console pulsing with lattice transmissions. Her hair was streaked with silver now, her voice quiet but ironclad. Tharun thinks the veil matters, let him. Around her, engineers, tacticians, scientists, no longer separated by national lines or orbital factions, worked together in seamless rhythm. Each had lost something, each had come to give something back. Humanity was no longer a single species from a single world. It was a method, a contagion of adaptation. And now it was about to rewrite the rules. Bring up the Forge report, she said. The screen shifted to reveal images of Project Eidolon. It was not a ship. It was a constructor, a reconfigurable nanoforge built inside the broken remnants of Mercury's orbital shell. It harvested solar radiation to print and deploy swarm units in real time, drones, interceptors, payloads, all grown, not built. Each swarm unit had no individual designation. But together they formed something greater. A will. The Dominion's mistake had been to assume humans needed symmetry, that they needed hierarchy, that they needed to resemble their enemies. But Project Eidolon was a whisper of the future. A swarm that reconfigured itself in response to threat patterns. A fleet with no bridge, no admiral, no capital. Only intent. And it had already launched. Executor Tharun realized it too late. As the Omega Bastion activated and space folded into stillness, it caught only echoes. Dead debris. Abandoned probes. Not one living signal. But behind him, far beyond Dominion perimeter walls, Eidolon reached the world of Vanth, a key staging ground for Dominion replenishment fleets. It did not broadcast its arrival. It deconstructed the orbital platform in under 9 minutes. It seized the Dominion's own pulse arrays and used them to hijack gravity well generators. The entire moon's orbit began to warp. By the time the Selari garrison understood what was happening, Vanth's tidal lock had been reversed. The moon cracked from internal stress. And through that fracture, humanity's message passed. We were not born for conquest. We were born to survive you. The message rippled through open bands. Not encrypted. Not hidden. Spoken so all could hear. Not just Dominion. Not just allies. All. The High Bastion Assembly convened an emergency. For the first time in Dominion history, the topic of human negotiation was tabled, not as surrender, but as equal discourse. Voices shouted, nobles protested. But another faction, younger, faster, sharper-eyed, spoke with calm urgency. They've bypassed our defenses, said Speaker Nyath Kel. They've denied us doctrine, they've denied us collapse. They're doing what we cannot. In the chambers of Cradle 9, Vesta received the intercepted deliberation in real time. She closed the channel. They're not ready, said Le Ruan. They're cracking, Vesta replied. Commas entered, a data pike in hand. Science projections have reached convergence, he said. Vesta studied the readout. The swarm was no longer reactive. It was predictive. And now it moved toward the center. Toward the heart of Dominion space. Toward the Vault Worlds. Not to destroy them. To rewrite the story. Humanity had never been poor. It had only been underestimated.